He climbed. The ravine grew steeper as it approached the summit, becoming more of a chimney than a channel. Crawford wedged his back against one wall, his boots against the other, and inchwormed upward. His arms burned. His legs shook. The garand kept trying to slip from his grasp, and twice he nearly dropped it, catching it at the last second with numb fingers. But he climbed. The ravine ended 10 meters from the crest, opening onto a small flat area carpeted with wild grasses and scattered with volcanic rock. Crawford eased himself out of the channel, moving with infinite care, and bellied down behind the largest boulder he could find. From here, he could see the machine gun nest 15 meters distant. 4 men, as he'd thought. The gunner prone behind the MG34, a loader beside him, 2 riflemen watching the approaches. Crawford's plan was simple because it had to be. He couldn't fight 4 men with 3 rounds. Couldn't flank them, couldn't outshoot them, couldn't outrun them. But he could make them make a mistake. He could make them think he was something he wasn't, a threat large enough to require all their attention, positioned somewhere he wasn't actually located. He selected a fist-sized rock from the scree around him, hefted it once to judge the weight, then threw it hard and high, lobbing it over the machine gun nest to land somewhere beyond. The rock clattered against stone with a sound like a footstep. Instantly, the riflemen spun, bringing their weapons to bear on the noise. The gunner swung the MG34, traversing away from Crawford's position. Crawford rose to one knee and fired. The first round took the gunner in the shoulder, spinning him away from the weapon. The second caught the loader in the chest. The third missed. The riflemen were already diving for cover, and Crawford's shot sparked against rock. He dropped the empty clip, slammed a fresh one home, and fired again. 3 more rounds, deliberate and aimed. 1 rifleman went down. The other scrambled backward, trying to reach the MG34. Crawford was up and running before the echo faded, sprinting uphill with everything he had left. The rifleman's hands found the machine gun grips, began to swing the barrel around, and Crawford fired from the hip, 2 quick shots that probably missed but forced the man to flinch. Then Crawford was on him, slamming the garand's stock into the man's face, feeling bone give way beneath the impact. Silence. Terrible, ringing silence. Crawford stood in the center of the machine gun nest, chest heaving, surrounded by bodies and spent brass and the sharp smell of blood. 4 Germans lay motionless. The MG34 pointed skyward, barrel still hot. And below, spreading out across the hillside in the growing dawn light, Crawford could see his company beginning to advance, small figures rising from cover, moving forward in short rushes, taking the hill that 3 machine guns no longer defended. Crawford checked his watch. 51 minutes had passed since he'd started crawling upslope. 51 minutes to silence 3 nests, to clear a path, to turn an impossible position into a captured objective. He was shaking, he realized. His hands wouldn't stop trembling. He sat down heavily beside the MG34 and tried to breathe normally. The rest of the day passed in a blur of adrenaline crash and exhaustion. His company took Hill 424 without suffering another casualty, swept the position, and began digging in for the inevitable counterattack. Crawford helped, moving sandbags, filling magazines, speaking to no one. His lieutenant found him at midday and shook his hand silently, unable to find words. Other men clapped his shoulder, offered cigarettes, called him names like Ghost and the Hunter. Crawford accepted it all with the numb detachment of a man who had looked into the face of his own death and found it boring. The German counterattack came at dusk. Artillery first, massive shells that screamed out of the gathering darkness and turned the hilltop into a moonscape of craters and flying stone. Then infantry, waves of them, advancing through the smoke with the mechanical precision of men who knew their business. Crawford fought with the same methodical patience he had used crawling upslope, firing until his garand grew too hot to touch, reloading, firing again. The Germans came within 10 meters of the position, then 5, then broke and ran, leaving their dead scattered across the approaches. In the chaos of that assault, Crawford was hit. He didn't remember it clearly afterward, just a sudden impact like being kicked by a mule, a feeling of falling, darkness rushing in from the edges. When he woke, He was being dragged backward by rough hands, German voices shouting in his ears. He tried to fight, tried to reach for his rifle, but his body wouldn't respond. Someone hit him, and the darkness returned. 20 months. That's how long William J. Crawford spent as a prisoner of war, moving from camp to camp across Italy and then Germany as the front lines shifted and the Reich collapsed. 20 months of hunger and cold and the grinding uncertainty of captivity. His company reported him missing in action, then killed in action when months passed without word. His mother in Colorado received a telegram. His friends held a memorial service. The army processed his paperwork and filed him away with the other honored dead. In January 1945, the War Department awarded him the Medal of Honor posthumously for actions above and beyond the call of duty on Hill 424. His mother accepted the medal in a quiet ceremony, surrounded by neighbors who had known Bill Crawford as a quiet man who hunted deer and never complained. The citation mentioned grenades and machine guns and extraordinary courage, but it couldn't capture the 51 minutes of controlled terror, couldn't describe the smell of volcanic soil or the sound of brass on stone or the way a man's hands shake when death becomes a mathematical problem to be solved. Crawford survived the camps. When Russian forces liberated his stalag in April 1945, he weighed 97 pounds and could barely walk. He spent months recovering in military hospitals, regaining strength, learning to eat again. And then, in the way of soldiers whose wars have ended, he went home. He never talked about Hill 424, never mentioned the Medal of Honor that his family treasured. He took a job as a janitor at the United States Air Force Academy in Colorado Springs, mopping floors and emptying trash and living quietly in the mountains where he'd learned to hunt. For nearly 40 years, he pushed his cart through the academy's halls, invisible in the way that janitors are invisible, watching young cadets learn the theory of warfare while he remembered the practice. In 1984, one of those cadets, a young man named James Moshgat, was researching Medal of Honor recipients for a class project. He found Crawford's name in the archives, noted the Colorado Springs address, and wondered idly whether any family remained in the area. On a whim, he checked the base phone directory. There was a William J. Crawford listed. Facilities maintenance. Moshgat couldn't believe it. He checked the dates, the details, the archived reports. Then he walked to the maintenance building and asked to speak with Bill Crawford. An old man appeared, 70 years old now, thin and weathered, holding a mop. Moshgat asked the question that had brought him there. "Sir, are you the William J. Crawford who earned the Medal of Honor at Hill 424? Crawford looked at him for a long moment, then nodded once economically the way a hunter acknowledges a good shot. "Yes, son. That was me." The story spread through the academy like wildfire. The janitor was a hero. The invisible man who mopped their floors had crawled upslope under machine gun fire and taken a hill single-handedly. Cadets who had walked past him every day suddenly saw him, stopped him in hallways, asked for stories. Crawford answered their questions politely, briefly, and went back to his work. On May 24, 1984, President Ronald Reagan invited William J. Crawford to the White House for a formal ceremony. Crawford accepted, uncomfortable in dress uniform, surrounded by generals and politicians and cameras. Reagan presented him with the Medal of Honor a second time, the first recipient having been presumed dead, and spoke about courage and sacrifice and the debt that nations owe to quiet men who do extraordinary things. Crawford accepted the medal, shook the president's hand, and afterward told a reporter that he was just glad his mother had lived to see the first ceremony. He mentioned nothing about 51 minutes of crawling through darkness. Nothing about the smell of cordite or the weight of grenades or the way a man's soul hardens when he becomes death incarnate. He had done what needed doing, he said. Anyone else would have done the same. But they wouldn't have. That's the point. That's always the point. William J. Crawford died in 2000 at the age of 85, surrounded by family, mourned by former cadets and fellow soldiers who had learned his story too late. He was buried with full military honors at Fort Logan National Cemetery, his headstone bearing the simple details of service. Private First Class, 36th Infantry Division, Medal of Honor. It doesn't mention the hill or the machine guns or the impossible climb. Doesn't mention that his tactical choices, removing his helmet, studying firing patterns, using terrain rather than speed, became teaching points at military academies worldwide. Doesn't mention that he spent 40 years mopping floors after proving that one man with patience and courage can break an unbreakable position. But those who knew his story remembered. The cadets who had walked past him unseeing, who had learned humility from a janitor with a mop. The soldiers who studied his actions and understood that warfare is mathematics and patience and the willingness to become invisible. The hunters who recognized in his tactics the ancient knowledge of the predator, that stillness defeats speed, that observation beats strength, that victory belongs to those who can wait while the world screams for action. Hill 424 still stands in Sicily, covered now in wild thyme and olive groves, peaceful under Mediterranean sun. If you know where to look, you can find the stone terraces where machine gun nests once commanded the slope. Can trace the route Crawford took, crawling upward through impossible fire, solving the problem of death one patient inch at a time. The volcanic soil still holds fragments of that September morning. Spent brass weathered green, shrapnel embedded in ancient stone, the archaeology of courage. And sometimes, on quiet mornings when the wind carries the scent of crushed oregano upslope, you might imagine you can see him there. A thin figure in mud-caked fatigues, moving through darkness with a hunter's patience, teaching the world that heroes don't always announce themselves. Sometimes they just empty the trash and mop the floors and wait for someone to ask the right question. William J. Crawford's story reminds us that extraordinary courage often wears ordinary faces. The heroes among us don't always seek recognition. They simply do what must be done, then return to their quiet lives. If the story moved you, please consider subscribing to support more deep-dive historical narratives like this one. Hit the like button to help others discover Crawford's remarkable legacy. And I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. What does Crawford's decision to work as a janitor for 40 years, knowing he held the Medal of Honor, tell us about the nature of true heroism? Thank you for listening. Remember those who served in silence. 1 man, 3 machine guns, 51 minutes that rewrote the rules of warfare. On a moonless Italian hillside in 1943, a 28-year-old soldier removed his helmet, smeared mud across his face, and began crawling toward certain death. The Germans never heard him coming. His own army declared him dead. 40 years later, a janitor mopping floors at an Air Force academy would finally reveal a secret that had been buried in the volcanic soil of Hill 424. This is the story of the ghost who conquered a mountain. The earth smelled of cordite and crushed oregano. Private William J. Crawford pressed his chest against the rocky Sicilian soil, feeling the vibrations of machine gun fire travel through limestone and into his ribs like a second heartbeat. Above him, perhaps 35 meters upslope, the German MG34s hammered the darkness with methodical precision, their muzzle flashes creating brief constellations against the pre-dawn sky. Each burst lasted exactly 4 seconds. Then silence. Then another burst, sweeping left to right across the hillside like a scythe through wheat. Crawford had been counting. He had been studying. And now, as September 13, 1943 crawled toward morning, he understood the rhythm of his enemy's fear. Around him, members of his company lay flattened behind whatever cover the hill offered. Scattered boulders, shallow depressions worn by centuries of rain, the corpses of men who had moved too quickly or trusted too much in darkness. The air tasted metallic. Blood and gunpowder. Someone was whimpering nearby, a sound almost lost beneath the mechanical stutter of the guns, and Crawford felt the familiar tightness in his throat that came before every moment of decision. His hands were filthy, knuckles scraped raw from crawling, and when he touched his face, he could feel the grit embedded in 2 days of stubble. He was 28 years old. He had grown up hunting deer in the mountains of Colorado, where patience meant the difference between meat for winter and going hungry. He had learned to move through forest without sound, to read the land like a language, to understand that speed kills the hunter as surely as hesitation. Now, on this godforsaken hill in Sicily, those lessons were the only thing standing between his company and annihilation. The lieutenant had called for artillery support. Standard procedure. Wait for the big guns to soften the position, then advance under covering fire. But Crawford had watched the pattern long enough to know what artillery would accomplish. Nothing but wasted shells and dead time. The German nests were dug into natural stone terraces, reinforced with sandbags, positioned with interlocking fields of fire that turned the hillside into a killing gallery. He had counted 3 distinct firing positions. The nearest was perhaps 40 meters upslope, tucked behind an outcropping of volcanic rock. The second was higher, maybe 30 meters beyond that, positioned to cover the first. The third crowned the hill itself, commanding the entire approach. Textbook defensive placement. Whoever commanded that position understood terrain the way Crawford understood hunting. He waited until the nearest gun completed its sweep, then moved. Not toward cover. Toward the lieutenant, who crouched behind a boulder the size of a jeep, radio pressed to his ear, face illuminated by the faint glow of the handset. Crawford slithered across open ground on his belly, moving during the 4-second silences, freezing when the guns spoke. It took 3 minutes to cover 15 meters. When he reached the lieutenant, the younger man's eyes widened with something between relief and irritation. "Crawford, get your ass back to." "Sir." Crawford kept his voice barely above a whisper. "Those nests won't fall to artillery. Stone's too thick. We'll waste an hour and still have to take them by hand." The lieutenant's jaw worked silently. He was 23, fresh from officer training, and Crawford could see the calculation happening behind his eyes. Orders said wait. Reality said men were dying. "What are you proposing, Private?" Crawford glanced up the hill, tracing the route in his mind. "Let me go. Alone. I can get close enough." "That's suicide." "Might be. But sitting here's guaranteed death once those guns adjust their range. Give me 30 minutes. If I'm not back, then call your artillery." The lieutenant studied Crawford's face for a long moment. Then he nodded once, sharp. 30 minutes. And Crawford? Don't make me write a letter to your family. Crawford allowed himself the ghost of a smile. "Do my best, sir." He crawled back to his position and began stripping away everything unnecessary. Helmet first. The dark metal caught starlight like a mirror, and even on this moonless night, the sky held enough ambient glow to betray movement. He set it carefully beside his pack. Then the pack itself, keeping only what he would need. His M1 Garand, 6 grenades clipped to his belt, 3 extra clips of ammunition in his pockets. He scooped handfuls of the volcanic soil and smeared it across his face, his neck, the backs of his hands. The mud was cold and gritty, smelling of minerals and age. When he was done, he looked down at his arms and saw they had disappeared into the darkness. Good. The nearest machine gun fired again. For seconds, Crawford counted the pause. 11 seconds. The pattern had held for 20 minutes now, which meant the gunners were either disciplined or exhausted. Probably both. He began to move. Crawling uphill under fire is an exercise in controlled terror. Every instinct screams to move faster, to find cover, to do anything except lie exposed on open ground while death sweeps overhead in geometric patterns. Crawford ignored those instincts. He moved in inches, not feet. During each firing burst, he remained absolutely motionless, face pressed to the earth, breathing through his nose to avoid the telltale mist of exhaled breath in cold air. During the pauses, he advanced 3 feet, sometimes 4, using his elbows and the insides of his boots to push himself forward. The M1 Garand was slung across his back, the grenades cold against his ribs. The terrain was a chaos of stone and scrub. Prickly pear cactus grew in twisted clusters, their pads studded with needles that found exposed skin with unerring accuracy. Wild thyme crushed beneath his body, releasing sharp fragrance that mixed with the cordite haze. The soil itself was loose in places, volcanic ash and decomposed rock that shifted treacherously under weight. Crawford chose his path with the care of a man defusing a bomb, testing each handhold before committing, distributing his weight across as wide an area as possible to avoid disturbing the surface. 20 meters. The first nest was above and to his right now, perhaps 15 meters distant. He could hear voices, German voices, speaking in clipped, urgent tones. Someone laughed. A short, nervous bark that died quickly. Another burst of fire. The sound at this range was physical, a pressure wave that slapped against his eardrums and made his teeth ache. Spent brass clinked against rock, the ejected casings bouncing downslope in musical chaos. Crawford waited, counted. 11 seconds. Moved. At 10 meters, he could smell them. Cigarette smoke, sharp and acrid. Sweat. The distinctive odor of gun oil and hot metal. He could see the nest now, a low wall of sandbags built around a natural cleft in the stone. The MG34's barrel jutted out like an accusing finger, sweeping mechanically back and forth. 2 men at least, maybe 3. The gunner would be prone behind the weapon. A loader beside him, feeding belt after belt into the breech. Possibly a third man watching their flanks. Crawford unslung the Garand with excruciating slowness, checked that the safety was off, then unclipped a grenade. The Mark II was simple technology. Pull the pin, release the spoon, count to 4, throw. He had practiced the motion 1,000 times in training, but training didn't account for the way hands shake when death is 5 meters away, or the way cold turns fingers clumsy, or the paralyzing certainty that any sound will bring instant obliteration. The gun fired. For seconds, Crawford pulled the pin, holding the spoon tight against the grenade body. 11 seconds. He drew his arm back. 8 seconds. 7, 6, 5. He released the spoon and counted. 1 Mississippi. 2 Mississippi. 3 Mississippi. 4 Missis. He threw. The grenade arced up and over the sandbag wall, a dark sphere against darker sky. Crawford was already moving, rolling left toward a jumble of boulders 10 feet away. The grenade detonated with a flat crack that echoed across the hillside, followed immediately by screaming. The MG34 fell silent. Crawford came up on one knee behind the rocks, Garand at his shoulder, scanning for movement. A figure stumbled out from behind the sandbags, silhouetted against the explosion's dying light, and Crawford squeezed the trigger twice. The figure dropped. Chaos erupted upslope. The second nest opened fire, tracers now, green phosphorescent rounds that drew glowing lines through the darkness, stitching patterns across the rocks where Crawford had been seconds before. The third nest joined in, and suddenly the entire hillside was ablaze with muzzle flashes and ricochets. Crawford pressed himself flat, made himself small, and began counting again. The second nest was firing in longer bursts now, 8 to 10 seconds. The gunner panicked and wasteful. The third was more controlled, disciplined, 3-round bursts placed with deliberate precision. Dawn was coming. Crawford could feel it in the quality of the darkness, the way the eastern horizon had begun to separate itself from the black mass of the sky. Maybe 20 minutes until full light. Once the sun rose, concealment would be impossible. He had to move now, had to press the advantage before the Germans reorganized. The second nest was 40 meters upslope, positioned on a stone terrace that jutted from the hillside like a natural fortress. The approach was nearly vertical in places, a nightmare climb even without machine guns. Crawford studied the route, planning each movement, each point of cover. A scatter of boulders to his left. An olive grove 20 meters upslope, the trees ancient and gnarled, their trunks thick enough to stop bullets. Beyond that, the terrace itself. He moved during the next pause, sprinting low across open ground, feeling horribly exposed, certain that at any moment the guns would find him. 10 meters. 15. He dove behind the boulders as tracers cracked overhead, splinters of stone stinging his face. His breath came in ragged gasps, not from exertion but from pure adrenaline. His hands shook. He forced them steady. The olive grove beckoned. Ancient trees planted by farmers long dead, their roots gripping the volcanic soil with tenacious strength. Crawford waited for the next firing pause, then moved again, scrambling upslope on hands and knees, the Garand bouncing against his back. A burst of fire caught him halfway there, rounds punching through the earth inches from his feet, and he threw himself forward, sliding the last few meters on his chest until the trees swallowed him. Darkness and silver bark. The olive trunks were massive, for feet across in places, their crowns spreading overhead in a canopy of narrow leaves that whispered in the pre-dawn breeze. Crawford crouched behind the largest tree and assessed. From here, he could see the second nest clearly. Two men, perhaps three, hunched behind an MG34 that traversed on a tripod mount. Sandbags and natural rock. A good position, nearly perfect except for one flaw: they were focused downslope, watching for an assault from below. They weren't watching their flanks. Crawford circled through the grove, moving from trunk to trunk, working his way around to the nest's left side. The ground here was treacherous, loose volcanic soil that slid and shifted, threatening to send him tumbling downslope in a clatter of noise. He moved with infinite patience, testing each step, advancing one careful foot at a time. 20 meters from the nest. 15. He could hear them clearly now, talking in rapid German, their voices tense. Someone was shouting down toward the first position, getting no response, and Crawford felt grim satisfaction at that silence. 10 meters. He crouched behind a low wall of stacked stone. An ancient property boundary, perhaps, built by farmers who could never have imagined their handiwork would shelter a soldier from Colorado. He had 2 grenades left. 2 chances. If he missed, or if the grenades failed to penetrate the nest's defenses, he would be trapped in the open with dawn breaking and nowhere to hide. Crawford pulled the pin on the first grenade, counted, and threw. The throw was good, clean, the grenade spinning end over end before dropping behind the sandbags. He was moving before it detonated, sprinting uphill and to the right, not waiting to see the result. The explosion came as a dull thump, muffled by sandbags and earth, followed by screaming. But the gun was still firing. The burst was wild, undisciplined, but it meant someone in that nest was alive and functional. Crawford dropped behind a boulder, his last grenade already in hand. The MG34 swept left, then right, searching. Crawford pulled the pin, held the spoon for 2 seconds, enough time to let the fuse burn down, then stood and threw with everything he had. The grenade hit the sandbag wall and bounced. For one terrible second, Crawford thought it would roll back downslope toward him. Then it settled into a gap between bags, and the world became fire and noise. The MG34's barrel bent skyward, suddenly silent, and Crawford was up and running, closing the distance, the Garand coming off his shoulder. A German soldier stumbled out from behind the shattered nest, blood streaming from his ears, hands empty, face blank with shock. Crawford's finger found the trigger, but he didn't fire. The man wasn't armed, wasn't threatening. Crawford gestured with the rifle barrel. Down the hill, go, and the soldier went, stumbling and sliding down the slope toward the Italian darkness. 2 nests down. 1 to go. The crown of Hill 424 was perhaps 30 meters above Crawford's position, but those 30 meters might as well have been 30 miles. The ground was nearly vertical, a scramble of loose rock and exposed stone that offered no cover whatsoever. The 3rd MG34 commanded the entire approach with perfect fields of fire. Whoever manned that position could see everything, could kill anything that moved. And Crawford was out of grenades. Dawn split the eastern horizon like a wound, spilling red light across the hillside. Crawford could see his own hands now, mud-caked and trembling. Could see the olive grove below him, the scattered boulders, the shattered remains of the first 2 nests. Could see his company, still pinned below, small figures beginning to stir as the light grew. And above, silhouetted against the brightening sky, he could see the 3rd nest. For men, at least, the gun traversing slowly, searching. Crawford checked his ammunition. 3 rounds left in the Garand's clip. 2 spare clips in his pockets. Not enough for a sustained firefight, but perhaps enough for something else. He studied the terrain with a hunter's eye, looking for angles, for possibilities. The approach was impossible from below, too steep, too exposed. But to the left, perhaps 20 meters lateral, the hillside folded into a shallow ravine, a drainage channel cut by centuries of winter rain. The ravine ran almost to the summit, emerging 15 meters from the nest. It was the only chance. Crawford began working his way across the slope, moving parallel to the ridgeline rather than climbing directly toward it. The footing was treacherous, volcanic soil crumbling under his boots, threatening to send him sliding back down in a cascade of noise. He moved in a crouch, the Garand held across his body, every sense screaming at the exposure. But the machine gun remained silent. Either they hadn't seen him or they were waiting for a better shot. The ravine was a scar in the hillside, perhaps 6 feet deep and choked with thornbush. Crawford slid into it gratefully, feeling the earth rise around him like armor. The bottom was damp, probably from a spring somewhere upslope, and his boots sank into mud with each step. But the ravine walls blocked line of sight from above, and for the first time in an hour, Crawford felt something other than naked terror.